Welcome back to the Horizon Line, a podcast brought to you by Horizon Behavioral Health. I'm your host, Ryan Weeks, and today we have four guys in the studio to talk about a really important topic, men's mental health. So I want to give these guys a chance to just go around the table here and introduce themselves.
Yes, thank you for having me, Ryan. It's good to be here this morning. My name is Keith Anderson, Dr. Keith Anderson, and I'm a native of St. Louis, Missouri. But I arrived in Lynchburg in 2003, and I had various roles throughout the community. I serve as a pastor, a public health specialist, and business and financial services.
Awesome. Yeah, Ryan, thank you for having us, man. This is such an opportunity.
Thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Really share some good information with the community. My name is Leroy Wingo. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Lynchburg. I was born and raised here in Lynchburg, left here at the age of 15, served in the military for 20 years, United States Navy. And I returned back home in 2017, eventually opened a private practice in mental health. And so, I love what I do and just giving back to the community. So it's an honor to be here.
Good morning, Ronnie. Again, thank you for inviting us here to join you today. My name is Bernie Kinsred. I am a licensed professional counselor. And like a couple of the gentlemen here, I'm from out of state also. I was born and raised in Chicago, but I moved to Virginia in 1992, and I have been working in corrections and mental health and substance abuse counseling for the last 30 years. Right now, I am the program manager for the forensics department here with Horizon Behavioral Health.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for being here today and just sitting down and talking with us. I want to just jump right in, and you guys have been working on an initiative with Horizon called the Barbershop Talks. And can you just tell me how that came about and what it means?
Well, about 2-3 months ago, I participated with a committee in which we did an awareness for mental health services here in the community of Lynchburg. It was at the Jubilee Center, and I was asked to facilitate a men's group, more or less, come up with some questions. And, we got some folks to sit on the panel. Dr. Anderson was one of them. We had several other persons on the panel. It was a really good turnout, I believe. And from the feedback that we received, they were very interested. I think we had about an hour or so on this panel that I facilitated and Dr. Anderson was part of. And from what I was told, a lot of the men felt as though we can probably speak another 2 or 3 hours. It was very moving. So I've participated in men's groups before, as have, these gentlemen here. And Dr. Anderson, he may be able to provide some more information as to his participation in the group at that time.
Yeah, it was an amazing time being in a space where men were encouraged to come and just glean from one another. So it was a pseudo-therapeutic moment, if you will, that organically arise from just Bernie leading us in some questions and opening conversation. And what we found was once we secured a safe place for men to talk, they wanted to speak. And organically, the momentum took us deeper and deeper, and none of us walked in the room with any expectation or understanding of what was going to happen. But we were just prepared to have a safe place for men to talk.
Yeah, so June is Men's Mental Health Month. Barbershop Talks have been happening every Saturday through June. I think we have 2 more, right?
Right.
Before the end of June. Do you want to speak a little to what's happening in the barbershops?
So I know I attended the first session on City Cuts, and, we had really good outcome. I think, like, one of the things I keep hearing everybody said, Dr. Anderson said, and gentlemen over here, is a safe place. Right? Organic conversations. In the barbershop, we know for years we've been attending that session, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it actually is a session without it being a formal session, right? And so that safe space for us to all have those conversations that we carry with us throughout the weeks, right? And when we can come there and have that conversation, we can organically let go of the things that we carry around. And we don't call it therapy, but that's exactly what it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's a nouthetic approach, where you equip people the best you know how to assist them in ways they need help. Now, it's informal in that there's not a appointment time or the expectation that it's your job to help the person sitting to your left or right.
Right.
But it's an understood phenomenon that when men go to the barbershop, there is no subject off the table. And
correct.
whatever needs to be discussed or unpacked or unloaded is done in the barbershop. I learned so many life lessons while waiting to get a cut.
Right.
And then once I made it to the chair and the cape went across my lap, it was my turn for the gentleman or the lady behind me to impart some wisdom from their perspective or their life experience or just the encounter of the men that I encountered at the barbershop made a difference for me, Bernie.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's very relevant to all of us. You don't go into a barbershop expecting to have a conversation, but you go into a barbershop getting a conversation. And as it has been said, nothing's off limit. You may go in there thinking, okay, well, the NBA Finals is on, we can talk about that, or, sports is, generally a topic to speak about. But, there's a myriad of different things that can be discussed in a barbershop. Again, particularly if you're waiting, and then, like he said, once you get in the chair, then there's another conversation to be had. It almost seems and appears to go from a group therapy session
Right.
to an individual session. Almost kind of like a debriefing, so to speak.
Right.
After you had the big conversation with everybody in the barbershop, and you're talking to this person, that person over there in the chair is talking, or this person over there is waiting. Then, as he said, when you get in the chair yourself, then there's the individual session, and that can sometimes still be a group session, but that's usually going to be time sometimes for the individual session thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Why do you think that is? Why does it barbershops that feel like such a powerful place for people to come together?
What I would say is I think it's something that's instilled in you, right? From a young boy. You go to the barbershop with your father, right? And you hear those conversations. And so it's like this is a kind of development in your life, right? That naturally takes place. And so it's just commonplace to do it. When you're an adult, it's like, this is what I'm supposed to do. Every Saturday I go to the barbershop, right? And so.
Yeah. And for me, or from my observation, there are very little rites of passages in the social dynamic of being an American, right?
Yeah.
Very few. There are some ethnic groups that have those rites of passages into manhood, right? But generally speaking, in America, there's not this one event for a boy to transition to be a man.
Right.
However, I believe that the barbershop experience is that common experience that little boys grow into adolescence, teenage years, adulthood, and that one place that they gather, no matter what spiritual background, ethnic community, any of those things, you're going to get a haircut. And so the one place where all men, all ages come together, no matter what their socioeconomic status is or how often you come, the experience is the same. There is an exchange in the barbershop.
Yeah, I can remember back to when I was maybe 6, 7 years old, and my dad taking me to Mr. McGee's in Chicago to get my haircut, and can still remember the barber.
Yes,
and
sir.
What he looks like.
Right.
And that that's almost 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But I still remember my dad taking me to the barbershop, as a little kid. And those are just things, like he expressed, you experience. Sometimes you remember those things, and, depending upon your experience, they can hold dear to you. For, when you become a parent, then you start experiencing those things as well, with your child, taking them to the barbershop and doing some of the things and participating in some of the same activities that you may have when you were younger, attending the barbershop.
Yeah, before every monumental event that occurs in our lives as a man, we're going to the barbershop.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We may skip a week
Right.
in order to ensure that we have a fresh cut the next week for that significant event.
Absolutely.
So there's a value placed in that experience and that particular place.
I've heard people call it like the third place. It's like you have your home where you spend a lot of your time. You have work, you spend 8 hours a day or whatever at work. But then other than church, like there's not another place except for the barbershop.
The barbershop.
And where else are you like strapped down in a chair and forced to like think and talk to people for,
That's right.
for an hour or however long?
Yeah.
I think it is one of the only places where guys feel comfortable to talk about things that they don't normally talk about. So here's a stat for you. Nearly 1 in 5 men in America live with a mental health condition.
For sure.
So I want to ask you guys, what do you think are some of the most common mental health challenges that you see men facing in our community today?
I think a lot of men suffer from like anxiety, depression, deal with, that struggle, just the challenges of everyday life, providing for your families. The roles that we play, societal norms, things like that really take on a real thing for men. We have a lot of expectations placed upon us. So we carry those burdens for our families, society, our jobs, the responsibilities. And so just carrying around that load and not having a safe place to unload, right? Not having a safe place to process. So I think that's some of the things that I see quite often that men are dealing with.
I think for myself, I've worked in jails and prisons, off and on for 30 plus years. And a lot of what I have seen is significant trauma. And very few men want to speak on something of that subject matter. However, when the subject is introduced and you have a room full of men and there is someone who is willing to become vulnerable and speak his truth as to how he has how trauma has impacted their life, then an entire conversation can be had with groups of men who don't necessarily know each other but can share in the experience of their specific traumas without being specific, but can attest to how it has affected them. I've seen men, in a correctional facility talk about their trauma, and other men, coming to their aid, after they just start crying, speaking about how they've been impacted, and so that's been my experience. Some men who have experienced trauma, again, particularly in correctional facilities.
For me, as a pastor of over 30 years, generally when people come to a house of worship, there's not a lot of opportunity for the back and forth. Generally speaking, there's a addresser, and the congregants or the people who comprise the audience receive what's being said, and then they pick up their belongings and they leave out. And very often I have follow-up meetings with individuals who expressed that what you said and what you talked about was great, but I have this luggage on my back. What do I do with it? And so I find that the mental health is the area that a lot of spiritual leaders in various houses of worship are most deficient in. Now, their spiritual acuity lends the intelligence and the assistance, but it doesn't replace the need for the attention to the mental, emotional side of a person, right? There are many different dimensions of well-being, one of being mental, emotional. So for me, this is giving me an opportunity to walk around and fellowship with the clinical brothers that are here at this table to say, hey, how can we partner together as a community and assist the population in our community that we all identify as vulnerable to explosive behavior or depressive behaviors or suicidal ideations or even attempts? How do we care for them? And I think that's the beautiful thing about partnering with Horizon in this juncture is that we all care about this community and the population that we serve.
Yeah, let's talk about stigma for a moment. Why do you think it's still so hard for many men to open up about their mental health? And how can we as friends and family help break down those barriers?
One of the things I'll say is the most impactful thing for me when I'm working with male clients, a lot of my male clients will come in and they say, well, I don't really need this. I'm just going to do it because it's this is what somebody wants me to do. And I said, okay, that's fine. Hey, let's just have a conversation, right? 2 hours into the conversation, it's like, I never knew I needed this. Right.
Right.
And it's like, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Right. And so just having an understanding that this is something that can be impactful in your life. Right. And having that, when you initially start talking and somebody tells you, this is the first time that I've ever been able to share this with anybody. Right. Can you imagine walking around 30 years, 40 years, in certain levels of trauma, things that's happened to you as a child, and you're walking through life with those things. Right. And you never can tell anybody.
Yeah.
So to finally be able to tell somebody that you can trust to have that conversation with. Awesome.
Yeah. And I think one of the important things is, being able to establish and build rapport, with the clientele. I think so often there is another stigma of, others thinking that, well, I don't really need this, like he expressed. People that of certain cultures, don't necessarily believe in or participate, in services like that. Dr. Anderson and I were having a conversation on Saturday at the Barbershop. And, he mentioned to me, there are some folks that are like, well, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pray on it. I'm going to, sit on it. And prayer is good. However, sometimes, you may need, something, a little extra. And I think, being able to understand that and being able to find someone who you have built a relationship with, who you have been able to, get some rapport with, can lend itself to some eye-opening experiences.
I think one of the biggest stigmas, and because I'm a Christian in the Christian community, is that faith leaders for so long have protected their legitimacy in their service to the community and didn't promote other people with other skill sets who could be beneficial to said community. And so I believe here, maybe last 20, 30 years, as Christian counseling has now become a bigger staple in the universal church, if you will, and there are more theologians who are trained in psychology and see the benefit of understanding how the human mind works, and sociology of how cultures and communities evolve and shape and the necessities. I believe that there's a more of an acceptance and awareness, but that doesn't take away from the impact of centuries of saying, oh, we spiritualize it, and therefore we handle it spiritually, and therefore it should be taken care of unless you don't have enough faith. And so now the very thing that people struggle with in the first place, they're now being told that they don't have enough faith or spirituality to deal with something they brought to the spiritual people to help with in the first place. And so hurt people. And I think the more we train leaders, knowing your limitations, knowing how and when it's good to collaborate with others. If we keep the interests of the people that we're serving forefront, then that takes a burden off of me to have all the loads.
I think that hits on a good point, because what tends to happen too is, we have to think of the other side of the coin. When you have the preacher or the minister or whatever, denomination you are, you're taking on that load of your whole church. Then who takes care of you, right? You can only carry the burden so much yourself. So having that partnership where you can collaborate and serve people is impactful for not only the member, but the ministers and lay leaders just trying to impart that service as well.
I agree.
Yeah. I think one of the stigmas too that we have to remember as men is societal norms. Society has these expectations of what a man is supposed to be. Right. And, if you're vulnerable and you're crying and you're this and that, well, you're not being a man. Yeah. How many times as a boy did you hear, suck it up? We can only suck up so much.
Right. Yeah. And so, in a correctional setting, something like that is frowned upon, because you don't want to appear and you don't want to be perceived as being vulnerable, because that could be burdensome. So now you're drawing possibly unwanted attention, and that stigma can be dangerous in those types of settings. I've had men tell me who suffer from depression or suffer from anxiety. Well, no, I don't want to speak to a psych doctor. I don't want to be on no medications because I don't want nobody to think that I'm soft or I'm weak or something like that. Because if I appear that way, then again, I become vulnerable. Yeah. And I don't want nobody to attack me because I'm taking mental health medication.
So survival.
Right. And so there's, that stigma that's associated with it, in a different particular setting as opposed to out in the community.
So I think something that we can do to break down those barriers just to start is to be there for each other. And we talked about this new campaign that you guys are also running, You Good Bro. Like just asking, starting the conversation, your family, your brothers, your sisters, or whoever you're around, and just checking in on them and see how they're doing.
Absolutely. I know when we were standing around in the barbershop last week before we started the sessions, and we had our T-shirts on, and people were coming in and looking like, oh, what's that, right? I want one of those. I want one of those.
That's cool.
Yeah, right. And it really is a cool thing, man, to check on each other, right? Because often we don't do that. You know, so it's things simple as that, just checking in. I know, you know, when we're doing these barbershop talks, this is a beginning of something that's going to be powerful. I know it's going to,
I believe it is.
you know, take root because it was accepted and is such a need, right? If I don't want to formally go to a psychologist or therapist for a session, being able to go to the barbershop and have that session and it'd be more formal but informal,
Inviting.
And I think more people will be open to seeking therapy. I know in the last few years I've seen a change, right, where men are more accepting, and I think COVID played a huge part in that. I think everybody was allowed to need help at that time,
Yeah.
right? So it kind of gave people permission to go get help. So I thought that's a huge thing.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that has really opened up my eyes is something you just expressed, that men are more willing to look out and say, hey, you know, everything's not okay. Everything's not the way in which, you know, it might appear to be. And they hold stuff, you know, they're stuffers, you know. And I was talking to a gentleman Saturday, and he was explaining some things to him. And I said, well, you know, we call those people stuffers. You know, they just take and take and take and take, and then all of a sudden they just, you know, explode out on someone who probably has nothing to do with everything that's going on with them. And it's usually somebody close to them, and they probably didn't deserve it. And then there's a whole big old mess that needs to be cleaned up. And he just kind of looked at me like, yeah, I know what you mean. And it's just as simple as just having that kind of a conversation. You know, not starting out with anything in particular, but just explaining something and then having them recognize it themselves. And it's like, wow, yeah, I know what you mean. So it's small conversations, you know, that we've had in barbershops so far that I think has affected some people. And it's not a matter of affecting the whole barbershop, but just affecting one person, and then that person telling another person.
From the barbershop talks that we have had already, were there any conversations or moments that really stood out to you from what people shared?
Yeah, I remember a young man, I want to be careful to, he shared that he was a part of a program and he had some behavioral issues that he had to deal with, contend with, and if he violated this behavior agreement, that he would be exited from this program. And it frustrated him that he had worked so hard to change his behavior. And the moment he had a bad day, someone else's assessment was that he violated the behavior agreement, and then he was going to be kicked out of that program. So in response to this new revelation, if you will, he exploded. He lost control of his emotions and he began to react to it. And it was someone who was also a part of that program and another counselor who came to his aid and helped him calm down. And Leroy said something that just blew my mind. So it was in that moment he said, hey, so what happened? He said, well, calm down. They let me stay. And Leroy said, no. He said, yeah. Leroy said, no. What happened is tomorrow came. He said, you just got to remember that if you just wait, tomorrow will come. And it just might be the change you need. There's nothing that you're going through that tomorrow won't come.
And if it doesn't come, we don't have to worry about it. Right?
We don't have to worry about it anymore. The problem is over. Stick a fork in it. It's done.
You know, one thing, being in this field, I get to the opportunity to work with many populations. And, you know, I work with the elderly population as well. And a lot of times the conversations are still stemming from childhood traumas, right? And things they've been through as youth.
Yeah.
So one thing I try to impart with most of my clients is, you know, life is going to go. It's going to happen, right? But what we don't want to do is be 70, 80 years old still talking about childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So if we can process it now, you can get a hold of it now where you can put it in a good place.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be something that you carry through the rest of your life, right? That's heavy baggage.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I always impart that and try to address those concerns and issues so they don't have to have those traumas later in life, right? It's having the same impact anyway. Yeah.
One of the valuable things that caused me to reflect on this past Saturday, is the Saturday before Father's Day, and how so many other people who were in the barbershop were talking about the impact that fathers had. But the realization that a lot of young men don't have fathers present in their home. But
Yeah.
you get a father every time you come to the barbershop.
Right.
Surrogate,
Right.
if you will. And so that's why we need to be there.
And I also believe that having the opportunity, again, to speak with persons who you may think don't have no relevance, have much more relevance than you realize. And people generally will always have more in common than they do differences. And it's not until a conversation sometimes is sparked that they realize, hey, you know, I kind of understand what he's talking about. And yeah, that's kind of happened, you know, somewhat to me or in my life or someone that I know, or this has affected me in this type of way. And yeah, I didn't have a father growing up and this happened and that happened, but I did okay and I turned out okay. Maybe this person can do the same thing and maybe I can explain or I can express, you know, how I was able to get through some of the challenges that approached me without having a parent in the home. And, you know, I think, you know, something Dr. Anderson said earlier, you know, conversations like this, they don't just stand pat. You know, they are affecting all types of persons, peoples, and socioeconomic conditions. It's not just geared towards one type or one culture or one, you know, person. It impacts it impacts various different people. And being able to be open and being able to be honest with one another and ourselves can have a very big and can make a very big difference, you know, to somebody who you may not think is listening or is being affected.
That's true.
Yeah, well, before we wrap up here, I want to give you each one last chance to share a message with our listeners that you think they should walk away with today.
Well, I'll just say this, Ryan, I really appreciate you guys doing this and inviting me to be a part of this podcast. So if there's any one thing I would want somebody to remember is that asking a person, "You good, bro?" is a start. Be committed to listen, to hear a response. And even if you can't fix it, at least they've been heard. So I asked the question, "You good, bro?"
I think very often there are persons who are not heard. And so as therapists, you know, we want to listen and being able to provide that person a space in which they can, you know, feel free and comfortable to express how they feel in order to be heard, because often, you know, that therapeutic session may sometimes be the only place that they are being heard. Sometimes they're not heard at home. They're not heard at work. You know, they may not be heard, you know, around their friends. And so as Dr. Anderson pointed out, you know, just asking, you know, being there to just listen and not respond sometimes can be so impactful for some folks.
What I would say is have the courage to reach out, right? Find a way to find somebody that you can trust, that you can have that conversation with. Not holding on to the things that we've been holding on to, learning how to give those things the attention it needs. Oftentimes we know we have to get rest to go to work tomorrow, right? We know we have to do those type of things, but having the courage to, you know, take off that load, if you will. You know, and what I would say is, like, you know, there's brothers in this room that really care about what people are going through, right? Or we wouldn't be sitting here, right? And so there's people that care, and just like he was saying, tomorrow will come. Tomorrow will come, but what do you want tomorrow to be? You want it to be the same? Because if nothing changes, nothing changes. Be willing to create that change for yourself and know that you deserve to have somebody here and help you with the things you're struggling with. As men, for sure. And women, but we as men, right?
Right.
Being able to be vulnerable. So
It's June.
It's June. It's our
Men's
month.
Health.
Right. Yep. So that's what I leave you with.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me here today. What a, you know, just great conversation to have us all here together. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you or a loved one are experiencing a mental health crisis, please call or text 988 to get connected with a real person who cares. You are not alone. If it is not an immediate emergency, you can also contact Horizon directly at 434-477-5000. Or for after-hours emergencies, please call us at 434-522-8191. That's 434-522-8191. To learn more about men's mental health, please visit www.horizonbh.org/men's mental health. Thanks for joining us on the Horizon Line. If today's conversation resonated with you, we hope you'll take a moment to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and that way you'll never miss a new episode. You can also stay connected with us on social media. Just search for Horizon Behavioral Health on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Oh, X. Thanks for joining us on the Horizon Line. If today's conversation resonated with you, we hope you'll take a moment to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and that way you'll never miss a new episode. You can also stay connected with us on social media. Just search for Horizon Behavioral Health on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. For more resources, upcoming events, or to just learn more about our services, visit us at horizonbh.org. And remember, keep your eyes and ears on the Horizon Line. We'll see you next time.